behaviour previously.
Not in my case, Chairman.
And welcome to Ian Stevens, who this morning has travelled about as far as I go on my holidays, because I go to Bembridge in the Isle of Wight. So Ian, welcome. At least he had a good breakfast on the way. As Luke said, we welcome Luke Stubbs and James Payne, representing the Police and Crime Commissioner. There is a consultation going out, you will remember from our last virtual meeting, on whether we carry on using virtual instruments, or are we always going to be present. I mean, I think the outcome from the group was that we like the virtual side of life, not for everything, but for some of us who live in the far north, almost in Berkshire, it's a 60-mile round trip for us, and if we're all going green, we need to look at those facets. So that consultation is still ongoing. Okay. Members' developments, item 8. As you know, all members are champions in certain aspects of the Fire Authority. Do we have any member development reports? A bit early in the day. Okay. Item 9. Roger.
Chairman, I mean, obviously I attended the Fire Commission a week or so ago, and I found that particularly interesting. I mean, Ian down there chairs the Fire Commission, so he will know probably more of the background than what I do, but certainly the meeting was very interesting. One of the things which was a recent fire which was in London, and I think the explanations of what happened there and why it happened in its connections with Grenfell was really very interesting and very concerning, with how things are developing in that area. So it's an area which I think that the service here may want to comment on at some stage in the future. I know that Neil was also present at that meeting, so but that was probably one of the main issues, and I felt was very interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I'd like to add, if I may. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the fire service for its work it's done on vaccinations. Absolutely first class. We're all very proud of the fire service, and well done to all the staff and all the people who were involved in it. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm right in thinking that Saturday they had their 100,000th vaccination in Basingstoke, which is terrific. And I know a lot of people on this authority never miss an opportunity to tell our people, our parishes, everything, just how well the fire service has done, and promote them. So those of you who do promote it, thank you. But 100,000 is not too shabby, is it? Okay, thank you. Item 9, appointments report and updates on the Constitution. Paul, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, members. Nice to see you all in person again. For returning members, this report will be hopefully familiar. It's a report or a version of it that comes to each annual meeting of the authority, and it is designed really to set the authority up for the year ahead and make appropriate appointments. So just running through the report briefly, it starts by explaining the political composition to the authority, of the authority, and that is as set out at Appendix 1 to the report. Now, at the time the papers were published, the member from the Isle of Wight hadn't yet formally been appointed, so the papers do show a vacancy from the Isle of Wight Council, but I'm pleased to say that we've had confirmation today that Councillor Stevens has now been formally appointed, so that Appendix 1 should be read as including Councillor Stevens. The report then goes on to deal with the proportionality of the authority politically and what that means in terms of allocation of seats to the two standing committees, and they are set out at Appendix 2. So as part of the recommendations, members will be asked to appoint to those two committees. The report goes on also then to deal with current appointments to the pension board, and members will be asked to note those appointments. And then at paragraph 11, there are a range of other authority appointments which need to be made today. APAG, all members are appointed to that. A principal officer pay review group needs to be appointed, so the recommendations ask for 3 members to be appointed to that group. At 11C, the minority group spokesperson needs to be appointed. At 11D, there is confirmation of the appointment of 2 independent persons following a recruitment process run by Standards and Governance Committee. Item E deals with the 3S Fire shareholder representative, who under the articles of the company would be the shareholder representative. And then 11F deals with just for noting the appointment of directors to 3S Fire, and then 11G deals with the working group that's needed to review the member allowance scheme. So those are the things that the recommendations then pick up for either noting or appointment. So when we come to the recommendations, we'll ask for members to be appointed to those various bodies. The report then goes on to cover a couple of general dispensations for members, and these are really a belt and braces exercise to make sure that there can be no suggestion that members have a disclosable interest in, for example, setting the precept where members also own property or have an interest in property in the area. It's a matter of debate whether these are strictly necessary, but most local authorities do, as to err on the side of caution, have these dispensations in place so that there can be no question of members being conflicted in matters such as setting the precept or in any business that may relate to members receiving an allowance from the authority or another authority. So the authority is asked to agree those general dispensations for the year ahead. Paragraph 15 deals with the authority's meeting schedule as it currently is, so the authority is asked to approve that. Noting obviously that the dates of meetings may change throughout the year, and that's something that the authority can decide to do. And then finally, the report just picks up a couple of very minor amendments to the Constitution, the first of which is just to add into the authority's terms of reference a further annual report that officers will bring to the authority around equalities. So that's really just to tidy up and make sure that that's in the Constitution and doesn't get overlooked. And then the final amendment to the Constitution is one that flows from discussion at the last meeting about members attending the local crime and disorder reduction partnership meetings, just to make clear that members are able to attend those meetings should they wish. So that is, I think, all I need to say about the report. Happy to take any questions, and we can then, once members are happy, move on to the recommendations, which we will need to go through in a little bit of detail.
Thank you, Paul. Do any members have any comments on this before we actually go through those recommendations? No? Yes, Roger.
Thank you. I think that, taking the first one, or Appendix 2, is the proportionality. Strict proportionality should mean that we have an extra seat, and with all respect to Ian, should lose a seat, but on one of the 2 committees. But we are not going to press that, because we believe that there should be democracy and everybody should have a fair share in what is going on within the authority, and that is the right way to actually conduct. We've always done that here. The last 4 years, when there was one Labour member, we didn't again challenge the strict proportionality. By agreeing this, it is against what the law says, but we are totally agreeing with it, so it can go through on this basis.
Good, thank you. Very sensible. Thank you.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to congratulate Roger Rice on his approach. Very good.
Thank you.
Very good collegiate attitude. We like that.
Sure, it'd be reciprocated, Chairman.
Don't push it. I did mean to say at the outset, people, that if you're starting to heat up a bit, officers and members may remove their outer clothing. Jacket. nothing else.
Can I keep my tie on?
You can keep your tie on, yeah. Okay, if I could draw your attention, please, to page 13, then we just need to go through those recommendations and allocate a few bodies. So 25, I mean, that's pretty simple. 26, that is pretty simple. 27, the authority to appoint members of the Standards and Governance Committee, and those people will be Councillor Fairhurst, who is chairman, Councillor Fuller, who is vice chairman, Councillor Glenn, and Councillor Harrison. Okay. Yes, sir.
Can I just make one comment? I mean, I agree with Councillor Harrison being on there. That's who we wanted to be there. One of the things which we feel, and I don't know whether this needs to be looked at within the Constitution, is that we should have deputies because there's only one person on there, and illness or whatever circumstances can mean that that person can't attend. And on that basis, it would seem only right that a deputy should be able to attend, because the meetings don't meet that often, but it is necessary to have a full number of people present.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's sensible. But can I suggest that we deal with that at the next APAG, having looked at the Constitution to make sure there aren't any technicalities which would stop that. But I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah. Paul, is that you, Paul?
Yes, it's me down here. Yeah, I think that is something we can look at and bring back potentially to the next meeting of the authority if necessary for both appointments and amendments to the Constitution. And just for completeness, I think it should be recorded that Councillor Stevenson is also appointed to Standards and Governance Committee.
Indeed. Sorry, Councillor Stevenson. Yes, you as the independent representative, indeed. Sorry. Okay, item...
Excuse me, Chair. It's Councillor Stevens.
Sorry.
Just to put the record straight. Thank you.
I said Stevenson, didn't
I think I said Stevenson, sorry.
No problem.
I? Okay, we'll settle on Stevens.
Oh, Mother would like it, thanks.
Okay, item 28 in the recommendations, that is self-explanatory. 29, that the authority appoint 3 members, including a chairman, to review the principal officer's pay, and that is Councillor Fairhurst, who's chairman, Councillor Hughes, and Councillor Price. Okay, 30, that the authority appoint 3 members in a formal working group on the members' allowance scheme, and that is Councillor Chadd, Councillor Fairhurst, and Councillor Harrison, who will appoint a chairman when they first meet. 31, Stakeholder Committee. Oh yes, 3S Stakeholder Committee is Councillor Price, Councillor Glenn, Councillor Chadd, and Councillor Mellor. Minority group spokesman is Councillor Price. 32, those 2 are done. 33, I've done the Stakeholder Committee. And 34, okay, that's just technical. 34A and B, and 35 is also technical.
35, Mr. Chairman.
Say again?
35.
35?
Yeah, that's to do with the Local Crime and Disorder Reduction Partnership. And we agree with the amendment to the standing orders or the Constitution, but we feel there should be some form of mechanism where that the authority, if a member wants to attend their authority partnership meeting, then there should be some mechanism that of how the authority knows that they want to attend and they have authority to attend from the service. I'm not going to argue how it should be done. I just think there just needs to be some mechanics set up to allow that to happen, because it does say that people can attend if they want to, but there needs to be a mechanics so that the authority that they're going to, or local authority, is aware of who it is.
Okay. Paul, any comment on that?
Thank you, Chairman. I think my microphone's not working, unfortunately, so I'll shout.
Try now.
Try now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's probably perhaps one for officers to share dates of future meetings with members, and then for members maybe to report back where they do attend at such meetings, probably as part of the normal agenda where members feedback on member development or other items, if members are happy with that approach.
Okay.
What I think it is that the member isn't going to know the dates of the meeting unless they're notified. And then if they turn up, if they turn up, is that the authority that they're turning up at might say you're not entitled to be here.
Can we promulgate those?
So the first part of your question, authorisation, the Constitution gives you the authorisation. We'll make sure that those safety partnerships know that authority members may attend, and we'll connect you with officers that already attend, so that there's a kind of join up there as well. So we'll do a bit of work behind the scenes, and perhaps if there's any issues with that, perhaps members come to us via an APAG or some other informal route, and we'll get it resolved there. But we'll do some work behind the scenes, as Paul suggested, to connect you.
Okay, thank you. Paul, any further comments to close this paper?
I think just one minor point. I don't know if we appointed Councillor Stevens to the stakeholder committee, so we probably just need to make sure that is captured.
I think we should.
We put on Councillor Stevenson, didn't we?
Katie, have you got that? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so we've been through the recommendations. Do you all agree with those recommendations?
Agree.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 10, Grenfell Tower Progress Report. Stu.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, members. I'm right the way down here in the corner. 4 years ago to the day, actually, we started some work both in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire Services at the time to do some gap analysis, some inspection, and understand the problems that were faced by colleagues in London Fire Brigade, the horrendous fire that happened at Grenfell. There's lots of work that's happened across the organisation to learn, understand and put measures in place to keep residents safe primarily, but also to look for the safety of our firefighters. And the purpose of this paper is to follow on from previous papers that have come to the authority to provide some reassurance in a public space. So there's two main elements of our work. There's a whole host of work that go around this, but two main core elements which are described within the paper. The first being the building risk programme and the establishment of an inspection team primarily to look at high-rise residential buildings. And my plan is not to go into too much detail around this, as a detailed report on that work will come forward later on in the year in December to this authority. Our goal essentially is to inspect all of these buildings, and there's somewhere over 300 now that we've identified, and we'll inspect and put in place measures that are needed by the end of this year. The outcome really that we're seeking is to be really proactive with the responsible persons, to update our risk information and to train our teams to ensure that anything that they come across in those buildings can be dealt with both before an incident or if an incident were to occur. We have received some additional funding from the government for this work, and we'll continue to report back to the Home Office on a periodic basis. So it's quite tight with some of the measures that we have to report on, both in progress and how we're spending the money, and we'll continue to do that. And what I can state for you today, members, is that we're on track, and I'm very pleased with the content and the approach that we're taking, that we will achieve the outcome that we need to achieve by the end of the year. And that, like I say, will come forward in a paper formally to the December meeting. So the second part of the paper that's described is are the recommendations from the Grenfell Inquiry and phase 1 of that inquiry. And in particular, there are 29 recommendations that were teased out from that inquiry for fire and rescue services, and some of them for London Fire Brigade in particular. And the focus around this, and I know that this isn't stated in this paper and has probably come forward in previous papers, the broad areas that those recommendations look at is the identification and understanding of the risk with cladded buildings, particularly those high-rise, and also the sharing of plans and our ability to call upon those plans electronically where we can. Also looks at the procedures around control rooms and the communications with the public and the incident ground when receiving information, to ensure that that is all joined up. The evacuation of buildings, and in particular the information that the public is given, the firefighters and their understanding of the different strategies, and being able to train our staff so that we can evacuate a building safely and quickly. There's also some recommendations around the provision of some new equipment. So one particular feature which you may pick up is around smoke hoods. And then finally, there's some changes to the way that the emergency services work together at major incidents. So that's about our ability to co-locate, communicate and coordinate our responses at an incident where there's major risk of life. So with this area in particular, we have again received some additional government funding. So we've had a provision given to us, and there were again some strict guidelines around how we use that funding, and that is around the provision of new equipment, in the main provision around new equipment and new technology to allow those joined up communications. And again, good progress has been made across the whole organisation. So all of our teams have been working really well together to pull these together. And you can see from the brief table in paragraph 27 some of the details around that progress and how far we've progressed on that. So in addition to that, there's lots of work, as you would imagine, with national and regional colleagues, and arrangements to focus on the overall goal of learning and improving from this horrible disaster. And our teams in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight have been really involved in pushing this work forward, in particular around the competency of staff and also in terms of the operational guidance around high-rise buildings. So they've done a really great job in moving us forward and putting us locally in a very good position. So in conclusion, our teams have put lots and lots of work and energy into this piece of work, understanding the risk in particular, and then being able to manage the outcomes for us to change where we need to change, and to understand and change our procedures where we need to. And I'm confident from the Director of Ops position that we're in a good place to be able to manage a similar incident or an incident in other buildings that we will have learned from. And I'm confident that our ability to respond to that. So there is a recommendation for members to note the content, but of course I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Stu. Before we have any questions, the Chief wants to say something.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Stu. I guess the first thing members to say is thank you to Stu and his amazing team for the work they've been doing in projecting your regulatory powers across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to make sure our communities are as safe as they can be. But just put on record and note that nationally, We are and should be concerned about the built environment as it continues to be looked at across our piece. It is something which worries us as fire officers, not only from the safety of our communities, but also from the safety of firefighters. And we will do our utmost to continue to regulate in that space where we're warranted to by the regulations that are in place. I know that will change over time. We'll keep you closely sighted on your powers, our powers together, so we know what we can or can't do. And I'll certainly be coming back to you in the near future with Stu's assistance and the teams to ask for your support in lobbying and pushing for certain regulations to be put in place or for certain improvements to be made to the built environment, which concerns us greatly going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, any points you want to raise on this paper? David?
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, I don't know about the detailed work that the officers have been undertaking, but it is my understanding that there's a bit of an impasse with regard to who pays to put these unsatisfactory buildings right again. In some cases, I'm sure other members would have seen news items where people are living in properties who simply don't have the financial means to pay for the necessary replacement of the cladding. I think, in truth, some of the buildings were erected at a time when building regulations and fire regulations were different to they are now. And my feeling is that this is a prime example where government, national government, should come in and provide the necessary resources to put it right. So I've heard from officers that they are providing some financial assistance with regard to other matters, but I wonder whether the officer would be able to give some assurance about the need for the necessary finance to be made available by national government to provide the effective repairs that are needed.
Let me ask the Chief to answer that one.
Thank you, Chair. And I may lean towards Stu for some of the detail also, but there's two distinct issues here. One about the reparations for what is now known to be an issue with cladding, which is flammable or spreads fire as it wasn't intended and wasn't known at the time. And those reparations are clearly being led by the central government and are specifically about certain heights of buildings, certain conditions. So the point that Stu pointed to very early on is we recognise every single building that is either in that position or indeed others which are lower than the limits set by government in terms of the reparation abilities, but also may not have the same cladding on, in which case it may not be as dangerous as that cladding. So we're very clear on which buildings have that on them. We're very clear about working with building owners about getting them improved. But in terms of how we or they access the funding, that is absolutely out of our hands. But you'll know also, I'm sure, that the LGA, the NFCC, and other organisations are lobbying government to try and make that more broadly accessible. Indeed, there's a local MP particularly that's lobbying hard on this issue to try and make that broader opportunity for people to get access to those funds to help them through a very difficult situation. So I guess as a fire authority, as a fire service, we are absolutely clear of the difficulties some tenants have in facing these charges, and we're absolutely clear we want to support them best we can, but the law is clear about where the grants go to and who does or doesn't get access to those things. We are about to become the regulator in that space, so we will find ourselves in the middle of that somewhere, and we have to be very careful how we step that. But clearly residents would expect us to make sure they're safe in the first order, and then we're going to make sure we find a way of making sure that their homes can be protected in terms of their ability to stay in them. So Stuart, I've said you want to add to or...
I don't think so. Maybe other than the... So again, prior to the formation of this authority, there was some public consultation and consultation that was returned from the former authority around the changes in regulations. So there have been some changes around the fire safety regulations to help us with our enforcement powers and identifying what our powers are, and also in the building environment where there are some changes to the way that buildings are constructed and how we're included in that. So there is work which, as the Chief says, is going on at a national level to try and influence a safer environment for the buildings of this country, and we play into that, and we've got officers that are involved in those works. And of course, the return of this authority went back as part of that consultation.
Okay, members.
Thank you.
Yes, Luke.
Thank you, Chairman. The Chief Officer just mentioned regulatory powers which will be taken on about tall buildings. I mean, in Portsmouth, for an example, I was aware quite a few years ago now, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, at least one of the student towers, for an example, had failed on the cladding, and nothing has actually happened. Now, as a local authority, the City Council has no powers over that whatsoever. That position is clear. So, how are you intending to use your powers against those buildings where the owners don't take action? What are you proposing to do?
I think if I answer that, so we've got a national set of regulations around fire safety enforcement. There's also national coordination around the actions that we take and the officers take around working with responsible persons for being able basically to resolve the problem. So we go through an audit process which is clear and transparent with the responsible person, and then our enforcement action at the back end of that will depend very much upon the actions and how that interacts with the national protocol. So where we need to enforce on regulations, we will enforce, and we do that on a constant basis. Where we can work with the responsible persons to put in place measures to make the building safer, we'll do that pending the further work, and that was always the ambition, is to bring the building up to modern day standards. The problem is that with those modern day standards, that work is still ongoing in terms of that built environment. So we're working to make the building as safe as possible in the first instance, and then we're working to ensure that building is ultimately safe, and that's where the responsible person works with the access to the government funds.
And if I may add to that also, and you highlighted this, the phrase we hear a lot of is buildings failing, and so what that tends to mean is when they do a certain check when they come to sell, because insurers want it inspected, it can fail a certain. It's not at modern standards. That doesn't mean it's highly dangerous. It's far from it actually in most instances. So we're aware of the most dangerous or the most unsatisfactory buildings. Let's put it that way. And by virtue of there being most unsatisfactory, they are more dangerous than others. But if any building were to be so dangerous it worried us, we have powers to prohibit the use of that building with the local authority. So, and we would do that given the need to do that. And pleasingly, we've not had that extent or extreme in this county. Other places have and have to decant buildings, but we would use that power should we need to. But clearly that puts the onus on us to make sure it is not in that situation. It is very simple after the matter, sadly, in fire and major disasters to say it should have been done. So our officers are taking every precaution to make sure we are as satisfied as we can be, but also recognising that it's a commercial ask. We're asking people to spend lots of money in these buildings, sometimes through no fault of their own because the regulations have had to change. And that's the balance we have to do as an enforcing authority along with local authorities, and that balance. So it's a difficult journey we're taking, and we're trying to protect the tenants, the community, indeed the fire authority, and all of that to make sure that we take the right steps. But rest assured, we do equally have some fantastic blocks across Hampshire, Portsmouth City, and indeed Southampton, which are sprinklered, have been retrofitted, and that's a great step forward. And we'd certainly, your position as a fire authority, which we hope will continue, is to expect to see sprinklers put in those buildings, and they are being retrofitted where they can be. And I'd want to urge to push that further in every opportunity you have as members of fire authority across Hampshire and Wight, because that makes a vital difference to, one, the likelihood of that building not failing, but two, the firefighter safety when they tackle fires in those buildings, which you'll recall we've had our own tragedy in that regard in the past. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chief. Roger, followed by David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's that Grenfell is all about high-rise and in particular cladding that building actually had. But there are other major issues, and we as an authority, I think probably 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, agreed that we would actually look at plans from local authorities so as that we could get right in at the ground level and make recommendations, although at that point we could say that it shouldn't get planning consent, but it had no teeth to it. But the law is slightly changed now to allow us to have those teeth. I'm just wondering whether the local authorities have picked up on that and are actually sending plans to the service to actually look at to make sure buildings are safe, because it's not only the Grenfell Towers cladding, there's many other issues of different types of cladding, and I think the thing which does start to surprise me, and there are a number of buildings at low rise with wooden balconies and wood is becoming, I don't know whether it has to be treated to be fire resilient or not, but certainly when it's just got wooden on there, and flames can certainly catch hold of that, and it goes like we see it anywhere else. So I'm just wondering, whether the local authorities are picking up on that, and if we have a problem also in that area of having enough staff to cope.
So I'll pass to Stu to answer the specific question, but a point of note on like wooden balconies, the challenge is between each floor of a block of flats, there is a partition, a concrete floor which protects the fire from spreading through, which always tends to work very, very well. Because if the fire can go out of the window into a balcony and then go outside the building, you defeat the object of that fire protected floor. So that's why the balcony is such a big issue. But to answer the specific question around the kind of consultation process now for particularly high-rise buildings, where in the past we'd have been a very low-level enforcement authority, now with the regulation change that Stu described, we are much more in the front of this. So I couldn't answer the question personally on whether we're getting more consultations in that regard. Stu, are you able to answer that question?
So in terms of planning, I recall so we've got a position statement from the authority where we pulled together at that time the voluntary nature, and we worked with. I personally met with a couple of local authorities to ask them for certain types of development to come to us at a planning stage, and that certainly happens. It doesn't happen across the board, but we're a statutory consultee at the building regulation stage, so certainly we get to see the substance of the building at that stage, and we answer all of those consultations. We go through, and we've got a team which is a separate team within our protection department, and they have a period of time that they have to respond within, and we measure that in terms of performance. It's actually included on the performance report that you have in front of you today. So I can give you that reassurance that we get to see the plans. It's not as early as we would always want, and I take your point about the planning element, and we'd like that to be more widespread. Certainly our officers at a local level work with the local authorities to identify the plans and to try and get to those conversations. But at those stages, sometimes the construction of the building isn't actually decided or discussed, so it makes it slightly more difficult. In terms of the other types of cladding, just to give you, I suppose, a little bit of reassurance, the number of ACM cladding that is around the county is very minimal compared to the number of buildings that we've actually inspected, and we are, as part of the inspection regime, undertaking. So the type of building, as the chief alluded to earlier on, we've decided to take the height of the building more as the risk, along with the cladding. So if we find cladding or a building is a higher risk, they will be added to the overall plan, and that's why the number of buildings that we've seen has gone over the original 283 that we managed to find. So we're over 300 buildings because we're doing that extra diligence around those sort of buildings.
David.
Thank you, Chairman. A comment and a question, if I may. Firstly, on Luke's point, it sounds like you had a specific concern about a building, and perhaps if you could take that up with Stu afterwards, it might be a good sort of case in point that we could then have a brief on backwards, just because that would sort of perhaps allay any concerns we have around that point you've got, and would give us a bit of an example of how things are being done. So if I could ask that to be done. My second question was around timescales. Obviously in the report we've got a number of items to be completed this summer and then 2 more later in the year. How confident are we around the timescales for this, particularly those that are dependent on outside organisations or bodies to be completed?
Very good question. So certainly all of the actions that are within our control, really confident. We've been working, like I say, for the last 4 years on this, and the team are very excited on that. There is some national work around the JESIP, the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Programme, which I'm assured that is on track and will deliver, if you like, the improvements that are needed, which obviously will then just require a dissemination through our team, so I'm confident of that. The technology is more of a sticking point because that is not really within our gift. So what I can assure you is that the technology where it allows control rooms to talk to each other, multi-agency transfer of information, that is more tricky. We are part of our control setup is across with Dorset and Wiltshire and Devon and Somerset, and as a collective we're part of the voice which is playing into the national lobbying position for that technology to be developed. So what I can say to you is that we're at the front of the queue and we're certainly the loud voice within that group. Whether that means that the technology will be developed, is not within my gift to say so.
Okay, thank you. Jason.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, first of all, I think I agree with the consensus that we all have and we welcome the report, and it affects all of us, but I think we could pretty argue it gives greater emphasis on both the cities, obviously Portsmouth and Southampton, because, and as Councillor Stubbs has just touched on, we have universities, both of us, number of high-rise blocks within the city. Portsmouth specifically, we're an island, so we've got limited space. We have the prospect of having to go up, i.e. more high-rises, because we don't have the land to develop on, and that's to meet, obviously, targets that come in for new homes. Recent years, we've had 2 large blocks in Portsmouth city centre. We've had to decamp hundreds of residents and move them. That seems to have been done pretty successfully. My colleague Councillor Harrison mentioned emphasis on government in regards to this, but I think morally you could argue the developers and the owners have some say in actually having to do that, but simplicity's sake, it's probably easier to go for the government on the grounds that maybe some of those developers are now defunct. But no, it's a good report. I appreciate it, and I hope we make some progress. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are asked to note this report, so members noted. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 11, which is the end-of-year performance and safety plan report presented by Chantha Dickinson.
Good morning, members. It's lovely to see you all in person again. So I've got the pleasure today of talking you through our performance over the last year and what a year it has been. So as I mentioned in the induction last week, this performance report, which is delivered on an annual basis, forms part of the overall suite of performance reporting and those lines of assurance that I'm able to give you on how the service is delivering against your policies and making life safer across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. You will also recall, some of you, that I also do a performance report halfway through the year as well. So this kind of takes us all the way back. And it reflects a wide suite of measures that are themed across the different areas within the Fire Authority's safety plan and priorities. And also we have, so that would be Appendix A, which I'll take you through in a moment. And also you can see through Appendix B how we've delivered against the safety plan in terms of the improvements, the specific improvements that the service have made. And it's worth noting as well that when I and my team and obviously the wider executive group look at performance, we also are always wanting to benchmark against similar organisations and gain comparators for how we're doing to really understand our direction of travel. So the question we're always asking ourselves is, who else has had this experience? Who else does this better? Where else can we learn from? And just to give you a little sense of that benchmarking and a flavour, obviously through the Inspectorate's round 1 inspections a few years ago, we've done that. Even through the COVID inspections that the Inspectorate did, whilst they didn't judge, it was a great opportunity to look at who had done what elsewhere. We ask for peer reviews, and you'll note within the contents of the report the health and safety peer review will be undertaking this year. And also, we have access to a national report produced by Cleveland Fire and Rescue Service on sickness. So again, that enables us to really deep dive in how our sickness levels are in comparison to others. And finally, family group 4. So that, some of you may remember that is a term referring to fire and rescue services of a similar nature, similar demographic. So that gives us a great opportunity to compare ourselves in our prevention, protection and response world. And also, we're always seeking to undertake value for money assessments, and indeed we did one over this last year as well. So before I move on to the highlights, I said what a year 2021, the financial year, has been, and of course we're only starting to emerge. But for us as a fire and rescue service, there are a few things I'd like to outline to you. So it created, despite the awful experience for so many within the United Kingdom and obviously across the globe, to create an opportunity for the fire and rescue sector as a whole, and clearly for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Services. We were an equal partner around the table. We led, under Neil's leadership, the COVID response for the Local Resilience Forum. We hosted the Strategic Coordinating Centre here. So what we were able to do was provide that clarity and steer our partners, together with our partners, that overall mission of making life safer. And of course, as we've noted earlier within the, was commented within the meeting, we were able to reduce pressure on the health partners during peaks and positively contribute to the vaccination programme. And of course, the other key aspect of the year for us was the build-up towards the creation of this new fire authority and all the underpinning work in terms of business preparedness and obviously the democratic support elements as well. And that has been a big part of what we had done. And of course, business as usual as well. So I want to take you to the highlights within the cover report and just talk a little bit of each of them. So from paragraph 4 onwards, you'll note that those subtitles are actually taken from our safety plan, from the Fire Authority's safety plan. And so our communities, that's very much us focusing on understanding the needs of our communities and how we can make life safer. There was a marked reduction in incidents and call volume, linked, of course, to the frankly absence of the nighttime economy and normal movement of people, which we've seen through the year. And definitely, if we looked through quarter by quarter, those peaks and troughs mirrored the lockdowns as well. Sadly, whilst we had a reduction in fire casualties, there was an increase in fire fatalities. And whilst each year, very tragically, we do see fire fatalities, that, you know, we would always say one is one too many. And to assure you, in terms of what happens when sadly one happens, is through our local safeguarding boards. We obviously as a service conduct a full review, and we're plugged into those to understand from a multi-agency perspective what has happened and obviously what we can take forward. Going to our people, at the start of the year, so this first of April, the start of the last financial year, we were just into a few weeks into lockdown, and as a service, we had a real grip on our absence figures, but also we were anticipating it, as the nation was, as the sector was, to be far worse than it actually turned out to be. And we were producing almost daily sit reps on our absence to the National Fire Chiefs Council. So there was actually a national picture of the absence. And to this day, the chiefs, the English fire and rescue chiefs, have a weekly call where they are talking on, it's sort of a hangover from the pandemic, talking around COVID response and, you know, various activities, but also other issues. So what's really lovely out of that is this weekly contact with the chiefs, and therefore that opportunity to share practice. Public value, you'll see in appendix say how we've compared our costs, and comparatively speaking, they are well against other combined fire authorities. And obviously, it's always challenging to quantify public value in terms of the actual outcomes that we produce and we contribute to. And so high performance, again, the bits that I'd like to pull out of that is around health and safety and also the internal audit opinion for this last year, which will be subsequently coming to standards and governance in a few weeks' time, of a substantial recognising that in this really difficult period where our staff, we were really pushing the boat out, in terms of pushing the boundaries of what we normally do so we could really make life safer, whether that was delivering vaccinations, sadly, body removal, or driving ambulances, where we could apply our skill set. We worked very closely, again at a service level, but also nationally with various staff groups, representative bodies, to make sure that our staff were able to do that work in an absolutely safe way as well. And obviously the reduction in health and safety incidents is linked to how we've changed our approach in terms of delivery of training. And then finally, the fifth area of our safety plan priority around our commitment to learning and improving and that continual growth as an organisation. I've said that demand reduced, I've said that incidents reduced, which they did, but other than the major incident which characterised the year, a large proportion of the year in terms of COVID, we had some significant fire-related incidents, which my uniformed colleagues around the table, we've all probably been to over this last year. And I think, what that demonstrates is we've had lots to extract learning from, and we speak within paragraph 8 around the app that we have. So we now have a tool which is you can have on your phone or desktop, a laptop, etc., whether you're a firefighter or you're the chief fire officer returning from an incident, you're able to input your, basically what went well, what could have gone better, etc., and all of that's captured. So that cycle of learning has been continuing. The growth work in that space is not just to focus more on that and squeeze all the learning we can out of operational activity, but also on the organisational approach as well. What can we learn? How can we do better? And again, whether that's at a multi-agency level, Steve in the last few weeks has been involved in a review of the LRF's response through COVID, or on a individual sort of normal activities within the organisation. So just within the cover report, just then pointing to the safety plan improvements, we in our year one improvements, we closed and we concluded 69 out of the 74. So obviously, I would say that's disappointing that we postponed 5. But of course, when you look into when I've looked into the detail of that, the reasons are largely out of their control, because they were around reallocating our resources to the battle of the day, which of course was COVID, and how we stopped and turned to meet that. So the challenge for us now is, obviously, as we are within recovery and we recover as an organisation and go back to business as usual, and of course the uncertainty of what the post-pandemic world looks like, of continuing to improve as an organisation. But there is a lot within the report, and I'm delighted to take any questions. But before I sort of move to that, I just want to conclude by saying that when we've looked back over this year of service performance of the safety plan, the performance has been sound across the board, whether that's our finances, our progress against the Fire Authority's strategic objectives, or simply our business as usual, our increase, for example, in safe and well visits, how we redesigned the delivery of that, and so many things, our engagement with children and young people. Sorry, my mistake. I should have also pointed, so I've prematurely gone to the conclusion, apologies. In Appendix 2, to within that slide set, we also, having described the delayed objectives, or rather postponed, and also what we've achieved in the last year, we also point towards year 2, which is obviously the current year that we're in. We're coming towards the end of the first quarter, and the sort of thematic areas within that are our improvements. So rather than, I think, 74 over the 5 priorities, we have 35 over the 5 priorities. They're chunkier, we're not doing less, but we're building on the first year though, and those foundations. And I think at that point, I'll stop and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chantha. Before I get members' questions or comments, the Chief would like to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. And once again, thank you to Chantha and her team. As Chantha transitions into the new role of Deputy Chief Officer and we amalgamate essentially performance and planning structurally, you'll see these reports simplifying, and certainly we'd look forward to your involvement and engagement over shaping them for your access, because clearly we can think we know what you need to see, but only you can really be the judge of that. And certainly going forward, Shantha's conversation with you will be much more about shaping how you want to measure performance across the service. A new authority gives us a great opportunity for doing that, along with our own structural changes within the service itself. But I have to say, outside that, and Chantha's alluded to this, I could not be more proud of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service over this period. It has been an incredibly tough time for most and all public services, and our teams have been second to none when it comes to leading forward and assisting with the big challenge of the day. And despite that, doing some amazing things within the Fire and Rescue Service context, which was normal and expected of your safety plan. So I'm very proud of that, but notwithstanding, always lots to learn, always lots to improve, and really look forward to your challenge and your contribution in the coming months and today.
Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Chantha, thank you very much for the presentation. As this was my first meeting, I did decide to read all 186 pages of the document, quite detailed. And so a lot of the questions I'm going to ask are basically for my own education, because it'd be really helpful for me. I looked at the staff turnover figure of 11.4%, and I thought that was high for any organisation. Is there a reason for that?
I'm going to invite Molly to come in, if I may.
Hopefully you can hear me better now. Yeah. Actually, our turnover is fairly steady. We most of our grey book colleagues are fairly long-standing and and generally retire. So if they're whole-time members of staff, generally fulfil their kind of 30 years with the organisation and then retire. So that's a fairly standard measure. What we have seen is an increase in turnover amongst our on-call staff. And that's related to some of the impacts of COVID, and probably they're related to their primary employment. We haven't seen the same transition in terms of our support staff. They have stayed with us during this period of time, but I think the on-call have had an impact because of impacts in their primary employment. So, but we will continue to monitor and include it in the performance report.
Thank you for that. Is there any merit in considering breaking out that figure then as to what is support staff, what is on-call staff, what is whole life staff, in order to identify the disparity between the three?
Yep, we can absolutely do that.
Thank you. The other thing that just struck me was the rural response times have gone up from 10 minutes and 2 seconds to 10 minutes and 40 seconds. And I recognise the fantastic work you did in COVID response. I just want to be confident that focus on COVID response didn't have any impact on those rural response times.
Stu, go on.
Yeah. I'm confident that wasn't the case, because the availability of our appliances was at such a high level because of a lot of people working from home. So we actually had a lot more of our vehicles available in the rural areas than we would do on a normal daily basis, because we haven't got that migration out of the rural areas to urban areas for work. I think that certainly some of the analysis that my team have done is around number of incidents. So because we had a higher level of availability, we actually used our on-call teams a lot more for incidents because they were available during the day, and therefore we have an inherent 4-minute delay because of the turn-in time to the station. So that gives us kind of a greater proportion, if you like, of on-call shouts that were achieved in that time. And I think that that's the analysis that certainly my team have been looking at, is around the number of calls.
Again, thank you very much for the explanation. I think it's the fact that when you're looking at a top-line figure, you have to really delve down underneath to actually understand the sort of the true essence of it. And the final question, which is probably more from my county council role, is I noticed that the fire casualties, was 7, but the age range was between 54 and the age of 101. And I always have this concern that in ensuring our residents live independently, because that's what they want to do. They want to, as I think Councillor Fairhurst once said to me, they want to die in their own homes. Well, it looks like, sadly, some of them are. I just wonder whether sometimes, because we don't see the underlying detail of the circumstances surrounding those particular fatalities, is whether actually social choice and social care has contributed in some small part to that fatality.
I'll pick that one up, if that's okay, Chairman, by you. I think you're absolutely right, and it shows the interesting and vital link between local authorities and the work we do, understanding that those risk criteria. We know that some profiles of our residents in our communities are much more likely to die in fire because of their propensities around either mobility or other issues. That is what the Stu's team does very, very clearly. And nationally, I lead for the National Fire Chiefs Council on Prevention. So the national work we're doing and trying to draw a standard together on how to identify the highest risk people. And that features a key part of the Fire Authority's safety plan. In other words, identifying those most at risk. So much like a business does, it segments its customers. We do the other way around. We try to find the most needy customers, if you like, and saying, how do we serve you first to make sure you're as safe as you can be? So those at home, which are known to social care, are vital for us to connect with and understand where they are so we can assist them and make sure smoke alarms are fitted. And the network that Stu's team has are very good at that. Sadly, occasionally people slip through the net for one reason or another, and some people are very hard to protect from their lifestyle choices sometimes, but sometimes not choices. And that's a real issue for us in terms of trying to protect our community. Sadly, we have kept fire deaths down for a number of years, and sadly they still pervade across the country. They are very low, much lower than they have been over the last 15, 20 years, but there is a stubborn number staying intact across the UK actually, and we're still looking for ways into this. It's better data sharing, it's better understanding partners, it's better access to people's homes so that they can get the message better from us, but it's always a work in progress.
David.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to echo what's been said about the performance of the service. It has been a very difficult and unusual year, and the way the authority and the service has responded tells me a little bit about the resilience and flexibility and strength of the organisation. I do wonder, from my previous time on the authority, we spent a lot of time looking at a risk register, and I don't know whether pandemic would have been high up on the list, but presumably that's changed a little bit from where it was. We're getting a lot of indication now that the COVID is something that we'll have to live with, and that does have consequences. But to get to my question, the question is, in responding to COVID and manning vaccination centres and all of the other things that we did, presumably a lot of the normal day-to-day business of the authority, things like visiting residents' homes and fitting smoke alarms and all the rest of it, there'll probably be a number of things which have sort of been set back, put on the back burner. And I wonder whether you have a sort of a database of all these things and are thinking about the consequences of all those changes that you've made and how you can get back to where we are.
Thank you. Wow, that's a big question. Absolutely. So when the inspectorate came and inspected us last summer, they lay down sort of, other than saying, pat on the back, you're doing a great job, they did lay down a challenge to us specifically in about 3 areas in terms of taking that learning forward. And I suppose there is a lot we're still unpacking from our experience of the pandemic. But I think to talk, like you gave that example of safe and well visits, very quickly we had to completely think on our feet to an extent in terms of, well, how are we going to continue to ensure we get to those we need to get to the most? And within the report, obviously it shows the figure, but it was a case of doing in person to the highest risk, but thinking about other delivery, as with so many other aspects of service delivery across the piece. What is interesting, though, for us, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and I think across the sector, is how our understanding of who is vulnerable has changed. And to kind of give you a flavour of that, so whereas in the past we might have said it's in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, we understand there's some risks around specific ethnic groups or specific age groups, or this combination of sort of, factors. It's a lot richer and deeper than that. And the National Fire Chiefs Council have, over this last year, kind of launched, and it's still in progress, a number of what they call equity or equality of access approaches, which we will all be inspected on, but I have no doubt by the inspectorate. So, for example, neurodiversity, the LGBTQ community, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller. So really breaking out those areas of vulnerability and helping or sharing good practice so that services, because it will be different, won't it, across England in terms of the social challenges and the makeup of the picture of helping services identify those that need that most. So it's something I'm hugely excited about. It also ties into the Fire Standards Board and the upcoming standard of what a well-led service looks like. So I suppose there's what I'm sort of saying back to you is there's lots of drivers out there for not just us looking back and going, oh, how did we respond to the pandemic? What can we learn? How can we prove that? But actually, real drivers to make a difference and use this as a catalyst for better understanding our communities and more effective products and services we deliver.
Okay, now we have got on the list Roger, Luke, Derek and David. Before I come to them, I would like to welcome our Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna, who has got to scoot off, I know. So, Donna, would you like to say anything? Public address?
Just moving forward, I am in a bubble with Luke because he lives on his own, so I can sit slightly closer to him without breaking the law. But hopefully we'll put it as a his time. Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me a few minutes to pop in, and I apologise for not being here this morning. I'm taking part in the Deputy Chief Constable interviews in a room adjacent to this one. I know in the past, previous commissioners have not taken up the kind offer that the Fire Authority offered to the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. And my position on this, one of the first decisions I made after consulting with Neil and with Olivia Pinkney, the Chief Constable, was that I think it's very important that the Commissioner has a seat around this table working with you as one of our very key partners. And for me, as Police and Crime Commissioner, there are a number of challenges ahead of us, for all of us in the public sector as we come into this post-COVID world, we hope. But certainly for me, there are three key partners that we are working with as a constabulary, and that is Hampshire Fire and Rescue, it is Hampshire County Council, and Thames Valley in terms of operational policing. So for me to not have a seat around this table, I think would be remiss of me, because I really need to understand the culture, the direction of travel and the priorities for Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service. In terms of and I'm grateful to colleagues who have emailed me about the Home Secretary's announcement of her review from March of this year, where there is still talk of potentially fire and rescue services being integrated into Police and Crime Commissioner offices, and I want to make it absolutely clear right now, I am not asking for that, I'm not pushing for that, that is not on my agenda. I have enough to do, as I've just realised, with Hampshire Constabulary, and I want to give colleagues reassurance that that is not a conversation that I am pushing for or encouraging in any way on the national platform, and I'm happy to have conversations with you again in the future if that would be helpful, or offline as well. So thank you very much for, as I say, allowing me the opportunity to have a seat around this table. I very much look forward to working with you all in the future. Luke, as many of you will know, was on the Fire Authority for many years, and I am hoping that Luke will be working with me in closer collaboration through my office, potentially as the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and that is subject to a conversation that I need to be having with the Police and Crime panel, as I think many of you are already aware. Happy to take any questions, or I will leave you to get back to your agenda.
Any questions for Donna before she scoots off? Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Donna. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming. It's an open door for you. Please do come as often as possible. You're most welcome. And thank you for the comments you've just made about the potential reform, if I can use that, of our services. It's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Jason.
Hello again, Don.
Hello, Jason.
Can I just echo that? And what a refreshment it is to see you come along and actually just say what you've said. So I look forward to greater involvement with you. I'm sure you have got the enthusiasm, Don, and knowing you as I do over the years, I think you'll do a good job. So thank you very much for what you've said, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Great, thank you.
David.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I also welcome Donna's presence with us this morning? We've not met before, Donna, so how do you do?
David.
I just wondered, sometimes in order to get what you want, you have to proactively do something about it. So will you be making any representations as a Police and Crime Commissioner to national government about your view about how we should operate in the future? I appreciate that it may not be a case of abandoning fire authorities altogether. It may be a case of perhaps you taking on the chairmanship of the authority, or any sort of combination of that. But will you be making representations so that your influential voice is heard at national level?
Thank you. That's a very good point. And we now have a much larger landscape in terms of the body of Conservative Police and Crime Commissioners. Actually, there are now 29 out of 42, which does include a handful of directly elected mayors as well, as I'm sure you're aware. We have had a meeting with the Minister, Lord Greenhill, who is leading this review into the future potential way that fire and rescue services are managed. And he has very specifically asked commissioners to get involved, to lobby our MPs, and to speak out loudly and in support of this direction of travel from the Conservative government. I made it clear that I wasn't going to do that. If the government mandate it, I said to him, okay, well, of course, that will be part of my role, and I'd then have to embrace that, and I'd be working with, the existing chair, the existing fire authority here in Hampshire, and of course the chief fire officer, to work a way where there is proper and meaningful strategic direction set by a very, very experienced fire and rescue authority that you have here. But I have made it clear that I will not be speaking out publicly on this, and I will not be lobbying the MPs. And in fact, I have had a couple of conversations with the MPs. I was with two of them, one yesterday, Kit Malthouse. I was with Maria Miller and Ranil Jalawanda on Sunday. I've spoken to Flick Drummond, Damien Hines. I've made it very clear that I'm not pushing for this in any way. They know exactly what my position is, and I will continue to reiterate that with the other MPs when I see them.
Well, I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Donna. Can you give us an idea of how, since you obviously involved them, how the other police and crime commissioners feel about this?
A mixed bag, I would say. In areas where the fire and rescue services, the fire authorities are not performing as well as they do here, obviously there is some kind of an opportunity, I guess. Also, obviously, as you will be aware, in other areas, they have not already got the windfall that could come financially of collaboration. We've already done that here. So, those kind of quick, easy wins that a commissioner might think, oh, well, actually, we could share this and share a strategic headquarters. We're already doing that here. We're very much ahead of the game. There are a couple of Conservative commissioners and a couple of Labour commissioners who are already integrated as as police and fire commissioners. So they've kind of given us their take on things. The closest one to me geographically here would be Roger Hurst, who is the fire and police commissioner for Essex. And as you know, that was sort of pushed his way several years ago because there were some quite serious structural issues going on within the fire authority there. So a very, very different landscape to the one here. And, from my perspective, if this is the will of the government, it's the will of the government. We can all make our own individual representations on that, and I'm sure we all will do. But there is no obvious reason, whereas in Essex there was a much more obvious reason, and the government had an issue they needed sorting out, and they clearly thought that the police commissioner in Essex was the right person to be able to do that. So.
Thank you very much, Donna. If I might suggest, Chairman, I think we ought to invite an outside Police and Crime Commissioner, like Roger Hurst, to come and talk to us at any of our subgroups if necessary, for him to let us know what he thinks the advantages are of having one person look after all this instead of having a committee. We ought to know what it's like on the other side.
I think he'd be very happy to do that.
Yep, good point. We will. Any more questions for Donna? Donna, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to come anytime.
Well, the next candidate's in 7 minutes, so I should probably go back and prepare. So I shall bid you all farewell, and I'll see you at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Back to Chantha's report. Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, a very good report from Chantha of where we're at, what we were at last year. It's headed up Hampshire and Isle of Wight. Now, the authority and the service only came to an amalgamated one from April this year. So it's actually headed up as a report for the amalgamated service. Now, the figures what it compares with, are they an amalgam of the two individual reports from last year, or are they Hampshire's figures? The reason that I ask is the one issue which I've been on about quite a lot in the past is about response times. Response times always worry me that they're going down, and they're down again here. And I know the same thing is happening nationally. The other services are finding the same thing, so there must be something inherent which is causing that to happen. But having said that, is that if this is an amalgam, did the Isle of Wight have any effect upon the last year's figures or the current figures which are in this report?
Thank you, Councillor Price. So I took the decision to amalgamate where possible, because whilst obviously the legal creation of the Fire Authority was on the 1st of April of this year, obviously the Shadow Authority has been in existence, and we've been heavily working towards that. So where it's been relatively straightforward to combine the figures, we've done so unless specified otherwise. So that may account for that. But Stu, is there any more detail on the response for? So I'll just hand to Stu on the specific detail around that. Sorry, Stu.
So I think in terms of response times, it is fairly consistent across the country. Whilst we have seen a boost in availability, on-call does affect us quite a bit. So if you look at our urban or our city areas response times, they're actually some of the fastest in the country. So Portsmouth and Southampton are averaging around about 5.5 minutes, which is very quick for a response to a critical incident in those locations. But because of the rurality of the majority of Hampshire, that does create us with quite a challenge. And that is something that I wouldn't want you to think that myself and my team are not alert to that. That is something that the group managers in particular have got as part of their their list of issues to look at, and the combining, and you may or may not remember the combining of some of our groups to bring city areas with rural areas will help that, so that we can look at the local disposition of appliances at the times when we have incidents where the risk is, to be able to provide a better service. So it is something that my team can continually look at. But the rural nature of most of Hampshire does create us with a problem.
Can I just come back on that? The point I was really trying to make is that, say, the report covers Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So if we take the figures for this year as this report, that is covering the two, but compared with the previous year, were they also amalgam of the two? Because if they weren't, we're not comparing apples and apples, we're comparing apples and pears. And I really want to try and drill down about the Isle of Wight. And I'm not getting at the Isle of Wight in any way at all, is that as I understand the Isle of Wight, it has one 4-time station and the remainder are retained. And therefore, can that have a drastic effect upon the Hampshire and Isle of Wight figure in a total?
If I may, I think it's a very sensible question in the sense that trying to understand the transition is key. But the thing to recall also is on the 1st of April, it is a joint authority and you're responsible for the performance across that piece. What I think Chantha's trying to do here with the team is find a sensible amalgam where they can, but happily do some more details around the impact. So, for example, Public Value is a good example where they've isolated both services and recognised the difference in those things. We know the Isle of Wight has had a different response standard in the past than Hampshire has, so we've got to think about how we do that, and those conversations are coming forward. And to some extent, the badging or otherwise is recognising that we're in a transition. So some of these, unlike normal reports, you can compare directly apples with apples. Whenever you bring two organisations together, which have been merging for more than 5 years, it becomes blurred and becomes more difficult to tell them apart. So I think there's a certain amount of apologies in that. It's going to be one of those things we have to live with as an organisation. But recognising if there's a specific issue you want to look at, we can certainly try and find the details for you and drill down and report separately on that matter. But as a whole authority, I think it's important to move to the future to say, now as Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, how are we doing? It's going to be quite hard to compare back to Hampshire as it was to compare back to Southampton in the old days as well. So I think those will be difficult to do specifically. But please do shout out if there's a particular thing you'd like to explore with us.
Luke, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So I've got a question, really. It's another one of, sort of perhaps dangerously over-interpreting statistics when I see them in the report, because obviously I recognise there's not the context there. But it does say in the report that in the last year, on page A11, that the workforce is down by 3.9%, which should be about 70 overall, and yet the number of support staff is up by 7%. Now, I'm sure there could be reasons for that, insourcing of functions or whatever, but I do think it's, I feel I have to ask for an explanation of why the number of support staff has gone up when the workforce has shrunk.
I'll start by answering that, if I may, and then I'll see if Molly can add any more detail that's needed. So we've had a significant amount of retirements that have taken place over the last year, which would have contributed to the reduction in staff retirements. And we certainly haven't had significant increase of support staff in terms of new posts created. I'll hand to Molly.
Thank you. We, as Chantha said, we have had some significant number of retirements amongst our operational colleagues. I think it's worth, some of you may remember that in the last year, we made a decision to withdraw from workforce development being part of the shared services arrangement. And so that was a team that moved in-house. So we have undertaken quite a bit of recruitment into support staff roles there in order to build a new learning and development function within the fire service, rather than that being part of the county council.
Okay, so you tutored some staff over.
Sorry, I missed the question.
So you've tutored some staff over.
Yes, some staff were tupied, and we've undertaken some of our own recruitment too.
Thank you.
Derek, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I too am a new boy on the block. In fact, Councillor Roger Price's question was very akin to what I was proposing asking, but if I can just break it down, the one thing that astonished me when I first read all the papers and the induction was that you had over 60 fire stations in Hampshire for 1.8 million. That's a very good proportion, I think, of station to population. Obviously, everything in this excellent report refers to Cross Hampshire or Cross Hampshire and the Isle of Wight now. Do you get a breakdown performance review, retained versus full operational station, area by area? Is this available to the authority, please?
So in the last few years, the authority has invested in additional technology. So we use something through Microsoft Office called Power BI, Business Intelligence. And the reason I'm naming that specifically, that's given us the ability for not just my team, but for the operational team, so within Stu's directorate, to have access to dashboards where we can see and we can view data and various graphics on what's happening where. So we can absolutely, I've given you very high levels, albeit very detailed, high level stuff. We can drill down. Certainly, I'm keen within future fire authority meetings to enable you to be strategic in your scrutiny of the service vis-a-vis performance, but always happy to kind of break that down, and equally outside, whether that's APAG or other private, one-to-one briefings, to kind of take you through that in more detail. So yes, if you wished, it could be available to you on that basis.
Thank you.
And David, please.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 quick points. First one is just an admin point, really, around the printing of the safety plan. In the agenda, it's not printed properly, so I haven't been able to properly read it. I think it was the same on the ModGov piece. So if we just make sure in future that's properly printed. The second point is quite specific, really. I do apologise for doing that in the full authority. But it's around the telephone risk assessments that were moved towards last year. Just as a point around effectiveness of those versus the safe and well visits. I mean, I appreciate we couldn't do the safe and well visits because of COVID, and therefore better than doing nothing is a telephone call. But has any work been done on how useful those are? And going forward, moving, post-COVID hopefully, and you've talked about more effective ways of working, my concern would be you can make more telephone calls quickly than you can do safe and well visits, which would look good as a statistic, but perhaps not be as effective as actually going out on the ground. So it's just a point around how you look to take those forward or not, and then obviously how useful they are, and also the information you get to do these, where does it come from? I definitely was told this 4 years ago when I was last on, but obviously there's only a limited number of telephone numbers available, etc.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fuller. So I'll take kind of a few elements of that, and I'll hand to Stu perhaps for some more detail. So to kind of paint the picture on context and learning and evaluation, and then also like where we get the data from. So one of the things that you may recall, but you could certainly go and find it, with the inspectorate in their 2018 inspection, sort of picked us up on as an area for improvement, was how do you know that this is a good, safe and well, what does this look like? What's the learning you're taking? And certainly across the sector, there's been significant work in the last few years, pre-pandemic, in terms of what constitutes a good safe and well visit, and how do we know what that looks like. So there's a little bit more standardisation, and again with the advent of fire standards outcomes focus, that gives the opportunity to really kind of hold a mirror up to that. That's, if you like, some sort of bigger picture stuff. In terms of the data, it's from a variety of sources. So some of it's referred in from other agencies, some in this pandemic time where we've had presence at Oakley Road in Southampton in the Basingstoke Vaccination Centre. We've effectively, been able to talk to people there, and so sort of self-generated, and our other sort of channels that we use. But also there's absolutely something around building on the good partnership working across the local system of public services in terms of data sharing, obviously with due regard and legitimacy, etc., to understand individuals or areas of risk. So it's quite a multi-layered approach, and I think it's one that will always be challenging ourselves on, because how do you know where the vulnerable people are, and how can we be assured we know where the vulnerable people are? But I think I'll hand to Stu just in terms of the specifics around the pandemic, safe in Wales.
If I just add a point, I think the Chief has got something to say as well. In terms of a couple of points, our community safety officers, so the CSOs, which are non-uniformed members of staff who they deal with the highest risk people. So we triage the risk or the people that we go and see. They didn't stop during the pandemic, so they continued to go to the high-risk individuals throughout the pandemic. So the telephone risk assessments effectively became like a triage tool. So if anyone the stations were very much stopped from going to individuals, but they did the telephone risk assessments, and if they produced a high-risk individual, that would go to the CSOs, and they would then go out and physically do the visit. So there was that continuation of some of those higher-risk activities, and that's something that we've seen certainly from colleagues around the country that didn't happen elsewhere. People were much more conservative, and we were kind of a little bit more bold with our supporting of the most vulnerable people. I'll pass you over to the Chief if.
Thanks, you through your chair. So just to add, I suppose the final part of that answer, I think, and Chantha did the national work. So the evaluation's a big question, not just for us, but for everybody, in terms of safe and well visits, visiting someone's home, educating them, changing perhaps their behaviours, walking away and hoping that they are safer, or telephoning them, having conversations, understanding their lifestyle, and then influencing them that way. So definitely nationally, the data sets are much better nationally rather than local, because you've got more numbers and you can test. But there's a fair bit of work happening now with how do we do that on a national scale, rather than individual organisations evaluate their own process, because there's a certain temptation to lean towards this must work, mustn't it? Now let's prove why it's true, rather than saying what is the benefit of doing it the way we're doing it. And certainly working with organisations like the LGA and others, I think I bored my own microphone. So making products like safe and well visits that actually work, or telephone interventions where we need to, because it could be a really efficient way of getting to high risk vulnerable people, as long as it works. So it's a really crucial point you raised, but it's not one we can answer ourselves alone, and we shouldn't try to just do that. But we are doing some evaluation ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it sounds like it's part of a wider package and perhaps a useful tool to lead somewhere else, so I fully appreciate that. It was just really around, through my own political experience, it's much easier to telephone 10 people than go and knock 10 doors. And if you can do 100 in an hour versus 3, even if the outcome isn't as effective, perhaps it's a nice statistic, isn't it? So it's just reassuring to know that there's a checks and balances on that to make sure it's a good use of time and resource.
Okay, thank you. We are asked to note, please, the 2021 end-of-year performance report and the 2021 safety plan year 1 improvements report. Noted? Chantha, thank you. Moving on to the last item, item 12, which is the Combined Fire Authority Progress Report, which is presented by Deputy Chief Fire Officer Steve Apter.
I've not been that quiet for a long time. Members, thanks ever so much indeed. This is it's a fairly high-level paper. You would be unsurprised with a programme as complex as it has been. There is a substantial programme close-down report behind the scenes, and members, James Lucy, the programme manager, would be happy to talk anybody through the details behind this, but the purpose of this paper was just to note the high-level sort of timelines and achievements to get us to where we are now as a combined fire authority. I think what I just wanted to highlight, particularly for new members and returning members, and obviously Luke, is some of the opportunities that at the time felt like threats. And the principal one being everything was lined up for delivery of the Combined Fire Authority on the 1st of April 2020. Pre-pandemic landing, we were aware of some of the capacity challenges within central government. I'd only landed back in the organisation in the April 19 and took over the chair of the programme board. And everything was pushing towards the, as I say, the 1st of April 2020. But there was still a lot of things to do. It was very heavily focused on processes at that point. And a priority we established very early on, particularly with my experience having been on the island, was processes will look after themselves. We need to get the people part right here. So we kind of changed the prioritisation within the board. What then happened was government, our liaison with government, they turned around and said because of the capacity issues within government around EU transition and the general election that was then called, they were pushing the delivery, the date to the 1st of April 2021. At that point, I thought that was the biggest risk, and certainly from an authority perspective, that there was some concerns there. As it happened, then COVID landed. And actually that year became the single biggest opportunity, ironically, because over the past year, and you've heard through the report, you've heard from Neil and Stu and others, how much the organisation managed to deliver over the last 16 months that we've been in the pandemic. And what transpired was, I thought the project was going to slow down. Actually, we delivered things so quickly ahead of schedule because we changed the way of working. Because we were working remotely, the teams, particularly in Matt's world, in IT, those areas around being able to get Microsoft Office across the Isle of Wight, things moved ahead by a year. So we got to a point, because of the communication channels we were establishing from a COVID goal perspective and SCG perspective, we're using Teams. We didn't have the infrastructure on the Isle of Wight. We got the infrastructure on the Isle of Wight a year ahead. That meant, culturally, the organisation started to behave as one. The briefings from the chief and myself and other officers every Monday morning were to the whole organisation, not just Hampshire and a separate one for the Isle of Wight. Over time, much of the opportunities, many of the processes just landed. Emails were changed without any dramas. The rep bodies, the consultation with staff was coordinated virtually. Because we had a concerted effort and a focus and a purpose around a pandemic, it became a team effort, a Hampshire and Isle of Wight team effort. The feedback we got from teams throughout was that sense of feeling as being part of a single team. As I said, we landed the processes, the systems way ahead of time. As you can see in the paper, we came in under budget as well. The only things that are now left, and they have been absorbed into business as usual, so I formally closed the programme down at the meeting at the beginning of this month, are a couple of issues around policy, around some of the on-call review, because that's a longer-term piece of work, and that's within the business as usual, so it's no longer a programme issue. It's no longer a CFA programme issue. And there will be some ongoing work around estates, and as I say, they've been wrapped up and they are captured in the safety plan as improvements going forward. So in terms of the team, the very small programme team who worked unbelievably hard, but it was absorbed, the way we ran the programme, on top of their day jobs as running the organisation. We had responsible officers, accountable owners for some really big ticket items. And because of COVID, because of that way of working from home, we got things done that much more quickly. Even the branding, which in and of itself, for those who may have done rebrands or brought organisations together, will know the complexity, the challenges. That ended up being one of the most simple and just accepted pieces and parts of the programme. It was a part I thought was going to be the most difficult and challenging. But staff really came on board, and the staff consultation process, led by Molly and Molly's team. In fact, the Fire Brigade Union, not famous for being on the front foot in terms of cultural change, in terms of this kind of thing, actually highlighted and wrote to us, as did all the representative bodies actually, and highlighted the consultation work we did as exemplary, as best practice. So I think, and I'll sort of leave it there because I think that was a great point at which we thought we've focused on the right things. We've got the people priorities there. Still work to go, as Councillor Price has highlighted. There's still some of the nuanced detail behind the scenes that we'll be working on for a long time yet. But ultimately, the Combined Fire Authority delivered on time with the revised. In fact, we delivered more because of the adjusted timescales. Came under budget, and the delivery is what we'll see develop through Chantha's reports, through the performance reports. I'm happy at that point to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
The Chief would like to say something.
Thank you, and thank you, Steve. Well, I want to a couple of things. First of all, to thank you as an authority, which you don't often hear a chief doing, because it took brave political leadership to arrive where we are, making this happen as a combined fire authority, Hampshire and Isle of Wight. They were difficult times over many years to achieve that, and that took brave political leadership and liaison between both here and on the island, and I'm grateful for it, because my life as a chief officer is made ever so much easier when politicians all agree on their direction, and that's something which is made much easier by the agreement over the DDIP years, right back as the paper describes, through to the most recent achievement of that combination. And I know some across all the constituents actually have still some concerns about the impact and how successful that may well be. Well, that's something that I and my team can get on with and deliver. So delivering your policy is obviously what we're here for as officers, and that I'm pleased that you reached that decision some time ago now, and we've delivered that in sort of spades. But equally to pay tribute to Steve, which I'm sure we'll say more about in a second, but Steve's leadership in this space, not only being an island, of course, and don't we know about that, but having pride in the island, having pride in this service, and coming to us as the Deputy Chief Officer has been fantastic having him on board, and he's led this particular programme really, really well. I'm grateful for it. And indeed, of course, the team have done such a fantastic job, two of which received commendations from myself for the work they've done, and the rest deserve a wholesome thanks on behalf of all of us for the work they've been doing behind the scenes, making this happen in despite what's happening in COVID and elsewhere. So I just want to round the report off it like that. But Steve spares blushes, but a massive thank you to him.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any questions for Steve on this last paper? No? Yes, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. It's a rather cheeky question, being asked of a man who's about to leave the organisation and retire. What's the biggest challenge going forward as you see it?
Digging a tunnel. I think the biggest challenge, when you look at other combinations, they are combinations that have either been combinations in name only, and officers will know what I mean by that. In other organisations, they haven't brought the organisations together, they've just changed the name. Other ones or other combinations of because they're landlocked. The Isle of Wight is geographically separate, and there are always going to be different risks associated with that. And the challenge is that we don't forget the Isle of Wight. And I mean that, with my heart on my sleeve, but I mean that as an officer, because it creates different resilience challenges, and I know the team here are more than aware of that. The biggest opportunity this gave was the transfer of skills and experiences across those services, and that's already happening. So I think there's challenges that we're capitalising on now. Thanks.
Okay, members, we are asked to note Steve's report. Noted? Okay. Now,
Mr. Chairman, yes. Before you move on, I think Jason Fazackley has got an issue which he wrote me a note earlier on. You might have seen him pass it to me. It's an issue which I think is very important, which you'd like to raise before you finish the agenda and deal with anything else.
Jason?
Sounds ominous, doesn't it?
Yes.
No, I apologise. I should have asked this at the beginning, but I missed it. If I can go back to agenda item 5, which was the minutes of the last meeting, final paragraph there on part 3, it mentions that former councillor Simpson and Hockley retired and were given a statue of commemoration for their work on the authority. It seems to me somewhat unfair that Sharon Mintoff obviously spent many years on the authority and didn't retire, so didn't get a statue, but then lost an election. So would it be possible for her, if that's not already been done, could we not give her a statue as well? Or some token of appreciation for her service?
If I may. Yeah, so obviously there were two reasons members leave the authority in the main. Councillor Mintoff and I did meet, and I did give her a certificate of appreciation, thank you for her time on the authority. Again, one for you to redress or to reconsider, perhaps. We have a standing arrangement around years served on the authority and the kind of, if you like, the recognition that goes with it. So she did get a certificate from the authority and from myself thanking her for her time. And obviously, you'll know how proud she was to serve on the fire authority and speak on her behalf. So certainly we try to do that as officers, but clearly there wasn't another fire authority meeting between then and when she did, the election result came. So yeah, we did do that on her behalf. But happily, I would be interested to see what members want to do about recognition processes and the years served and all that sort of thing, and to redress that at some point. But following the current arrangements, I made sure to do that on your behalf.
Jason, thank you. Good point. Now, look, there is no finer way of closing this fire authority meeting than to let you know, those who don't know, that Steve was awarded the Queen's Fire Service Medal in the last honours list. Don't worry, Steve, more cringeworthy stuff to come. So, Steve, on behalf of the authority, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for you retiring in June, for all the hard work across the many years of service. Throughout this time, in various roles, you have devised new strategies, been key in driving success, and the service overall has benefited from your insight and leadership. So on behalf of the authority and the people of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, I would like to take this opportunity to offer you our heartfelt thanks. And, talking of things, you'd better come up here.
Not yours, that my brother is.
Come along. And it's even got your name on it.
Fantastic. That is, there you are. That is, thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I want to say a few words, as you'd expect, and then I'm sure Steve often has something to say in these occasions. So for me, having Steve back in Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service, as you know, Steve was the Isle of Wight Chief Officer after a long established career on the Isle of Wight, and he is a bit of a well-known character on the Isle of Wight. I'll leave others to comment in what way that's true. But Steve is well known and well loved across both Hampshire and the Isle of Wight now, as he is in every other organisation he has worked in. For those of you who are social media followers, you'll see one of the announcements of his Queen Fire Service medals. Sometimes, let's say, for senior people, aren't so well received by some, but he has been completely supported and loved by everyone I've seen on social media in the comments and support he's had. So clearly a very popular award there by Her Majesty, and we're delighted that Steve has been awarded in that way. Because it speaks volumes for his leadership that he's blushing about that, because he is someone who gets on with things and does not seek his own praise or reward that often. So for me, when we managed to steal him back off London Fire Brigade, as a Deputy Commissioner of London Fire Brigade, a fantastic and really challenging job and role he had there, I was absolutely delighted that the Fire Authority appointed Steve as the Deputy Chief Officer at that period, and allowed us as an organisation to really move forward in our cultural journey, as well as some of the more functional things with the Isle of Wight, because of his specific knowledge and care of the Isle of Wight handling during that period. So I've heard it said that leadership is for the brave, the passionate, or the unfortunate. But I'd definitely put Steve in the brave and the passionate box. His selfless leadership saw his own job go in the Isle of Wight. He was the master of engineering out the Chief Officer's job in the Isle of Wight. I was once told by a very established leader that you're ready for principal leadership in the Fire and Rescue Service if you're ready to get rid of your own job. Now there's a man who's done that, and one of the few, if only person I've known who's ever done that. So a true selfless leader, one of the key tenets of public leadership. He's also he's caring and has very high empathy, and is a fantastic ukulele player. But that's only outdone by one of his talents, and that is his amusing stories. He has the ability to hold court like nobody I know and can tell a story at the drop of a hat. So ask him a question, he'll always have an answer. Whether it answers your question is a different question. But he has been a fantastic officer for us here, and we've really enjoyed his time. The fear for us as a senior team is who's going to tell the stories going forward. So that is a key challenge for us. But Steve, from me as the Chief Officer, on behalf of the service, a huge thank you. I know there'll be other times to say this, but I wanted to say in front of the Fire Authority, I know you've been, you appointed him, thank you for that. And you know, I am genuinely thankful. That wasn't meant to be sounding sarcastic, but no, I am grateful that he was appointed, and he has been a lifelong professional friend and a personal friend of mine. We joined together here at Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service in 1991, where we almost to the week. This next week is the 30th anniversary for me and the 31st anniversary for Steve. He did a year, I was on call, I think, beforehand. So we were trained in these very walls 30 years ago, so you can blame them and not us. So it's been an absolute privilege to serve with him, and I really welcome your comments today you've made, and indeed the Queen's honour he's been bestowed. So for you, Chairman, if Steve's able to make a few words, I'm sure he always would.
I'm not normally lost for a word, and I'm great speaking at other people's leavings, not my own, but all I will say from an authority perspective is thank you. Thanks for your support. As I said, the draw to come back, apart from getting my sanity back, getting out of London, was the ability to be able to come back and be part of something that was quite exciting going on here, which was Hampshire and Isle of Wight combination, new safety plan, which the team, we went on a journey, I think it's fair to say. But as I've always said, you know, it's the journey is more important than the destination, and it has been a cracking journey. I just wish I could have stayed a bit longer. I don't think Neil thinks that, but I wished I could have stayed a bit longer. And just remember this story. When I received my 20-year long service good conduct medal on the island, the Lord Lieutenant at the time, so I marched up, got on the stage, and as he leant forward and hung the medal on me, he leant forward and whispered in my ear, "That's 20 years of not getting caught." I just hope Her Majesty doesn't say anything similar, but I do feel like I've kind of got away with it, and I thank you for letting me. Thank you.
Okay, Chief, officers, members, thank you. There being no further business, this meeting closes at 12:27.